Takia Gadola, here we go. Another episode of Talk About Bupkes. Welcome to the Bupkes' podcast, Talk About Bupkes. I'm your host, Noah Kochovich, the Secretary General of Words at the Bupkes. If you're not already, you should subscribe at, you heard it, thebupkes.com. Follow us on all the usual so-called social media and get this podcast wherever your ears go for them. Now, we got a great new episode for you today. We're talking to Brussels bubble legend, Shada Islam. She's a journalist, commentator, policy analyst, and just an all-around nice human being. And that would be true even if the bar for some goddamn human decency weren't as low as it currently is. Shada is a prolific and thoughtful writer on matters of race and diversity, and not just the performative kind that makes white liberals feel good about themselves. So, in the upcoming conversation with her, we talk about what that means and what it means when she says Brussels so white, and also why she's still long on the European project no matter how much it keeps falling short. So stay tuned for that, but first, as we close out this Goy year, along with most everyone else, we're going to try a little something new. So bear with us and let us know if you like it. We're introducing a new segment to the Talk About Bupkes podcast. We're calling it Bupkes of the Week. Our inaugural Bupkes of the Week isn't really from this week, but it's certainly something we've been thinking about this week. And it ties quite nicely to what we're going to hear in our conversation with Shada about the double standards that are totally killing whatever was left of Western credibility and claims to so-called values and rules-based order. Right, so remember back when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine? And Europe and America were like, oy vey, this is the worst thing since, like, Hitler. There can't be war in Europe. That's just not allowed, so they all said. And most of the rest of the world was like, yeah, this is pretty bad. But what does it remind us of? Right, all that war and rule breaking we've been dealing with since forever, and a lot of it was stuff that you guys did. So whatever might be the global north was just so shocked that whatever might be the global south was not so keen to race to sign up to sanctions against Russia or otherwise condemn it. Now, it's not that the US and the EU were angry, it's more that they were disappointed. So then they figured, well, we're going to sanction the non-sanctioners, what's called third country sanctions evasion and avoidance. And all the usual baddies are those kinds of third countries. Let's see, you've got your Turkeys, you've got your Chinas, you've got your UAEs, you've got your Saudi Arabias. Saudi's Arabia. Attorneys General, Saudi's Arabia. I don't know. We'll leave that to you to decide. You know, the third world, global south, non-Western, anti-Western, non-democratic haters of civilization, those kinds of folks. And there was one other country on that list. Who was it? Oh, that's right, Israel. Right, Israel is on the list of the sanctions avoiders. Israel is that country that loves to say how Western it is, shared values, only democracy in the Middle East, we're fighting them here, so you have to fight them there, blah, 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 blah. You know, those nudniks. It's funny how Israel, though, rarely gets mentioned when we talk about Russian sanction evasion. Now, I wonder why that is. Now, when it's the other team, it's
battle between democracy and autocracies.
When it's your team, hey, it's complicated. Look, is it a values day or is it a realism day? It's hard to choose sometimes. Now, you'd think a state that calls itself Jewish might care about another country whose president is Jewish and plays a fairly big role in Jewish history, Ukraine. But Israel also loves its billionaire oligarchs, which is a bad look when you're trying to counter anti-Semitic stereotypes. In a way, though, you could say that maybe Israel is taking its Westernness a little too literally, trying a little too hard. After all, what's more West than deciding when you feel like standing for the thing you say you stand for? Which kind of sums up what Ukraine is all about.
The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden.
Values are a vibe, man, is basically what we're saying. That's why we are awarding Israel's non-compliance compliance this week's Bupkes of the Week. Mazel tov. With that out of our way, we hope you liked it. Let us know if you did, don't, or otherwise. Let's move on to our full conversation with Shada Islam. For that, we wanted to turn it over to a new addition to the Bupkes team. William Glucroft is joining us, and we are mostly happy to have him. Now, William lends this zine some journalistic integrity that, let's face it, we kind of need. Plus, that WASP name of his might make us, how you say, more palatable for some audiences. Also, let's be honest. He's way more a people person than me. I mean, they don't call Noah Koklovich Secretary General of Words for nothing. Best of all, William isn't nearly important enough to have any connection to Jeffrey Epstein, so we're safe there. So enough of that little introduction. Here's the full discussion with Shada Islam coming up right after this short break, not from a sponsor. It is an honor and a privilege and a pleasure as William Glucroft to have had this great responsibility turned over to me by the Bupkes to do this podcast and on such a fortuitous episode because I get to interview someone I've had the pleasure of getting to know the last couple of years. And now that I am here based in Brussels, getting to know in person and in our atomized, isolated life, it's always nice when we can actually meet people in person. Shada Islam is here on the Talk About Bupkes podcast. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for, first of all, letting us into your lovely home and for giving us the time. You're a very, very busy and productive and prolific person. You have your own Substack, right?
Yep.
Which is called?
Simply Shada.
Simply Shada. Nothing better than that.
Yeah.
The Bupkes is a big fan of Simply Shada, and we think you should be as well. Of course, you're also everywhere else. I think I've seen you lots of times in The Guardian, in the EU Observer. Where else have I?
South China Morning Post.
South China Morning Post.
Yeah. And also, I speak at conferences, I'm on panels, and I try and moderate some conversations on topics that I like. So, I'm doing quite a bit.
Yeah.
And, end of the year, it's all getting to us. We're getting a bit tired. So, excuse me if I'm a little sort of, you see? If I'm a little lost for words sometimes.
That's okay. The Bupkes is a big believer in being lost, kind of lost among the ideas.
Yeah. Jet lagged as well.
And jet lagged as well, which we're going to get into why you're jet lagged. But yeah, you are very much part of the Brussels bubble in a way, but also still after all these years on the outside of it. And I think that's something we really want. That inside-outside dynamic is something that I think is fascinating and important and really gives you a unique insight, which is why, one of many reasons we're so happy to have you on Talk About Bupkes. So, you're jet lagged because you just came back from China.
Yeah, so
quite a trip.
Yeah, on a working trip, a very short one. I was there for maybe 4 days, 4 nights, something like that. No, I've been, before I sort of became this sort of conferences and panels and all that, I was a full-time journalist for a magazine called the Far Eastern Economic Review, which was published in Hong Kong. So, I've been working on China-EU relations for about, almost 25 years now, and also EU relations with the Indo-Pacific, etc. So Asia is very much part of my expertise, and I teach. So, it's interesting.
And you teach.
And I teach.
I need to make a list here of all the things.
Yeah, it's a Gemini thing, we're all sort of, multitasking and doing several hats at the same time, but basically at heart a journalist. And so, China has been very much part of my professional life and increasingly my personal life as well, because, one makes friends. And wow, what a story, very complicated, multifaceted, as we say, but, so I like to go there and, I have contacts with think tanks there. So it's fun. Short, sweet, but really, in any case, going to Asia, William, you know what it's like. I mean, it just gives you so much energy. You go from rather fussy, Europe, and then you're in this dynamic of, it's just amazing. So I was in Sanya, and the talk was very much about, as you can imagine, Donald Trump, the new U.S. national security strategy, and of course, the Chinese, just like us, are quite confused about what this means. But
so we're not alone. This is good.
We're not alone.
Strength in confusion.
Yeah, But I would say the Chinese come out of it looking pretty good.
Well, this is the take from, I wanted to ask you, that's the take from this side, that Europe is getting beaten up and China actually is all right. Is that how people you spoke to, they're also viewing it?
Yeah, for sure. But people are confused about why this is happening. And,
Okay.
they don't understand so much Trump's sort of, racist impulses and Islamophobia and why he thinks Europe is on a downward decline, civilizational decline. And he says because of people like me. I don't think the Chinese...
I had my suspicions, Shada.
Yeah.
You're hearing it. This is the downfall of civilization right here.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Chinese don't get that part of things, but they do get the part where they're suddenly, Europe is not an ally, but...
of the United States.
Of the US. Sorry, yes, I'm talking about the strategy. And, but I have to say, it's also quite sobering because, William, they don't think much of us Europeans either in China at the moment.
So really just getting it from both sides.
Yeah.
And is there's also a declining civilization, racialized, racist? What is their where's that coming from for them?
Not from any of those places, as far as I can tell, but from the fact that we are so divided, the fact that we can't get our act together, the fact on many issues, right? Now we're seeing struggling over Ukraine and Russia and all that. But also just because we are, I think we've lost the plot when it comes to the multipolar world. A little bit because we were so sort of stuck to America's coattails. We didn't see the world outside this transatlantic relationship. And now that we've been flung into the unknown, we're discovering that this multipolar world is very complicated. And, things like colonialism and all that are very much part of the discourse. So, and also because I think they just think that we have for so far lived in America's shadow. So I think the Chinese are going to watch very carefully how Europe develops. But for the moment, it's really very much more about America and, and this upcoming summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump next year. Lots of talk about that. And whether that would be a meeting of minds or a meeting of the strong men, so the G2, or whether they'll be competing. And I think the bets are that they'll get along pretty well. And then we, Europeans, will be left outside.
Which is so fascinating because you would think that multipolarity would be good for Europe because it would give Europe a seat at the table, right? It would be one of the poles, certainly better than a bipolar or a unipolar sort of hegemon. Yeah. And yet the opposite is happening, that Europe is really, however we define it. We can spend a whole podcast on what is Europe, but if we can make the assumption that there's some idea what Europe is, it's really struggling and flailing in this idea of the U.S. isn't the hegemon that it once was, but it also is.
And it hates us. What are we going to do without Big Brother? I've watched and been part of this conversation between the EU and the global South. Let's call it that. Once again, you can talk forever about
what is that? Where is that? Who is that?
It's a state of mind.
Yeah.
It's a state of mind.
I like that, a state of mind.
It's a state of mind. The global South state of mind. And so, for a very long time, when I was reporting, as a reporter, not a columnist for the Far Eastern Economic Review, there was a sense that the EU was still sort of struggling, but, it was on an upward curve, if you like. So, we had the euro came in, there was enlargement, there was this, talk about strategic autonomy, and the global South really felt that this is going to be a partner which is going to go beyond trade. So of course we know the EU. I know this is getting a little boring, so maybe I'll stop. But the European single market is a big attraction across the world, whether it's Africa, Asia, Latin America, for free trade deals and all that. But there's also hope that this would be, Europe would become into a political union, and there would be kind of, security discussions with Europe and all that. It hasn't happened as quickly and as fast as the global South would have liked. And meanwhile, once again, the little problem of colonialism, neocolonialism, let's say this discussion about Eurocentrism, all that, very much there as well. So there's a lot. And then I have to admit, and we can talk about it as well, double standards. This has become the big issue for many global South countries. Doesn't mean they won't sign trade deals, but that soft power that the EU had, that normative power, that attraction, human rights and values and all those things, that has sort of disappeared now.
So I'm very happy to see that our conversation is already going the way that our conversations tend to go, which is like in a million different directions all at once, which I love so much. So let's try to like break down some of these really big ideas. Back to China really quickly. What would you say, because right now China looms so large, probably for a long time, but really looms so large in the Western or European imaginary. Where does the imaginary, in your mind, no pun intended, meet with the reality?
So far, I don't think it has. And I think that is one of the problems we're having when we have these tensions with China. The European Union has now called China a competitor, a systemic rival, but also a partner.
Right. Mirroring a lot of the U.S. rhetoric.
Joe Biden's time, the conversation exactly, that period. And very much still clinging to the hope that I think some Europeans still foolishly have, is that their good times will come back and they'll have a good ally and they can then cling again to Europe's coattails when it comes to questions as important, existential questions, such as, China. The imaginary China is really based on Orientalist ideas, right? So we see that a lot in foreign policy. In fact, there's stories to be done about how, those fantasies, those images that have sort of been there for decades, centuries even, still are in our minds when we're thinking policy-wise. And then, I think flawed policies result from that kind of imaginary, the fictional narratives that we have. And the one on China is that, of course, strong men, a communist party that doesn't care about its people, it's only about progress and moving forward. And once decisions are taken by Xi Jinping, everybody just falls in line. The people are not happy. That everywhere in China now there's progress, that, human rights are being abused sort of everywhere, that kind of thing. It's very much, and of course, on the economic front, a lot of discussion about, subsidies and overcapacity and all those boring things. So there's a picture of this imaginary China, which is, I would say, what's the word for threatening, right? And then you're seeing it now a lot with younger people, but also just people going to China and discovering that it's not at all like that. I mean, there are elements of that, of course. Imaginary always has some kind of basis in reality. But the reality of China is it is messy, it's very complicated. Xi Jinping is in control somewhere, sometimes, somewhere always, depends on which sort of area you're talking about. And that, the economy is flagging. There are problems about, not jobs as such, but aging and, where do people put their money, consumer power, etc. So I always find it fascinating. And, it's up to us as analysts or journalists to try and make those two come together. But I think in today's world, the imaginary has sort of taken over so much of our minds, literally, and in a sense, it's creating a lot of these tensions that we're living through at the moment.
Yeah, I think that it's, when I observe, and this is with China or many other policy points, it's the absence of a political answer to a lot of these issues. The imaginary fills that gap. It's almost like a fallback, like we have nothing better to sort of present or to engage with, so we kind of fall back on stereotypes, cliches, or even just sort of incorrect or skewed assumptions about what the other side is thinking or what they want to do. I don't know if you see it that way.
Yeah, I think frankly our media, and both you and I are part
Guilty.
of it, is guilty of that, not just in the case of China, but generally, simplification and, broad brush stories. And I think the reality of people and the world and countries is much more interesting than these fictions that have been created, fabricated over the years, sometimes going back centuries, as I said. And then, the kind of the fake news comes in, disinformation comes in. It's all very, 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 very messy. But I think it is our job as I mean, at least that's what I try and do now. I think you understand, is to try and bring that vision of a complicated story, but also an interesting story, much more interesting, much more exciting than what these fake fiction, narratives, as you said, are there. Much more interesting, not one-dimensional. It's not a single narrative. It's just, and I love that. I mean, for me, journalism has always been about finding the messy places and trying to get and trying to find how people actually in real life, rather than in movies or behave. And in the case of China, yes, there are constraints, and yes, it's a communist government and all that. But man, oh man, I mean, you see the way they've developed, and how savvy the kids are, and how just the system is working. For people like me, don't forget I was originally born in the global south, I'm not a white European, and I don't have perhaps all those kind of instincts of, we are better and they are, they're an inferior race. I don't have that when I talk to the Chinese, obviously,
Yeah.
So I think that helps the interaction as well.
And they're probably approaching you with that in mind, that they're not approaching you in the way they might approach someone else from Europe.
Yeah, I think that is the case. And it's not just for the Chinese, it's true for the Indians, for the Malaysian, Indonesian. That was a big asset when I was working for the Review. And I think my editors understood that because, it was a very global magazine based in Hong Kong, Americans, Australians, New Zealanders, British. I mean, it was really a very, very Indians, very good mix. And I think the fact that all of them were very, very, based in Asia and were experts. I'm not saying I brought in anything important in that sense, value added. But there was this thing about that, I could bring in the stories that maybe some of them just missed. For instance, I worked a lot on women's issues in South Asia, child labor, bringing in different aspects of it, not just that, my God, it's terrible, let's stop buying goods made by children. So, I think it helps, and that's why my other topic of passion, diversity is so important. Diversity of thought,
Right.
not just racial and ethnic, but also diversity of thought, diversity of experience.
Yeah.
If you're all coming from the same school, somewhere in the UK, or
Would never happen.
Never happens. You're the posh boys, and you think in a certain way, but
You're describing The Economist right now.
No,
Every cover article I've ever.
China. What happens next? I mean, it's funny. I tell my students that I don't want them to come to me on China or any Asian country quoting the FT or the Economist.
So these are
great. No, they're great. I'm not saying they're not good, but they do sell a certain vision of
they have their particular diversity.
Yeah, they have, and they're looking at it from a very different angle. And if you're in my class, I want you to have an open mind and make up your own mind. Read beyond the Americans and the Australian and British literature. Read, Asia has a very, very exciting media landscape at the moment. I say at the moment because, everything, the bloggers are there, and, that. I mean, all the newspapers, you can have them translated in a second. So I think, once again, the more the merrier, really. And you get different viewpoints. And what was I talking about?
I think you talked about diversity, which I think is really interesting because I think diversity, as you said, gets in the sort of this liberal malaise gets just chalked up as kind of a box checking exercise. Yeah. And sort of a feel-good virtue signaling thing. And I know...
Performative.
Very performative. But exactly to your point, especially in journalism, you need all kinds of people, not because it makes you all feel good in some moral way, but like people will literally see a story differently and bring in voices and bring in an understanding and a context that someone else, through no fault of their own, just the way where they were born and how they grew up, would be completely different.
Yeah.
And that to me is fundamental to any kind of journalism. So I think that, if I can continue on what you were saying, I think that might be a really salient point when we talk about diversity.
It is, yeah.
And speaking of the narratives and the imaginary, to me it's still amazing how there is still this sense of superiority in that people in China obviously want to come to Europe.
Oh, yes.
Right? And China's just a stand-in for anywhere else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
the more I'm looking at the world, it's like, I think actually we might end up over there. And not because we're forced into some like authoritarian nightmare.
We may be. We may be.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted
No,
you.
please.
No, I mean, what you say raises a concern that I did want to bring up, and I do bring up with my white European friends, is that a number of very talented Muslim in Europe, Dutch, French, German Muslims, Belgian, are migrating, are leaving Europe. I mean, so the far right would say so much the better, but that's not going to be the case, because these are people who are very, very essential to our societies, our economies, our politics, our arts, our culture. So many are fed up. I was just talking about it the other day to a friend of mine, they don't want to live under maybe not authoritarian regimes, but racist governments, or at least governments where the far right is setting the agenda, or a European Union where the far right is increasingly setting the agenda. So, no. I think in this world, people are moving. They've always moved, William? We know that. Now it's become a political issue, an ideological issue. We want the white Ukrainians, yes, but even that is now beginning to be a little tired.
Well, now there's money on the table, so that's kind of trumps everything.
Yeah. But the world is changing that, and I think the Europeans have to realize that as well. But diversity also not just in journalism, but look at the fantastic movies that are coming out from the global south, and you can see them on Netflix and other streaming services. Amazing movies, and that kind of thing that Hollywood never produced, but it had such a dominant share of the market that we rather never did get to see those fantastic movies. So diversity in arts, I think, you're listening to music from different places. And if you don't have that diversity in policy making, which is the case in #Brussels so white, we don't have that diversity, and we are getting very flawed policies. You see? So, I mean, I think people are learning that when you're making, if you're going to take, working on something on Afghanistan, you shouldn't just be talking to yourselves. You should actually be talking to some Afghans, and not necessarily the diaspora Afghans, but also Afghans there. When I was working at Friends of Europe, a think tank based here in Brussels, I was there for 9 years. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to bring in as many people as I could from the global south, from China, from Japan, Korea. They're not global south, but also, countries that we engage with, to talk about their stories, their interests, and not just say, this is the European view. I don't know if this still happens. I've been recently to a few meetings, and it doesn't look like many people listen to what others are saying. I mean, we're so focused, seriously, William, we're so focused on America. We know more about American culture, American politics,
it's crazy,
American
right?
Politicians.
And that even happens within Europe. I know from my experience in Germany, people will feel closer culturally or socially to Paris than they will to Warsaw. Even though you're across the border, like Berlin, you can bike to Poland.
Yeah.
And there are people in Berlin who have never been to Poland, but they'll go to Paris all the time, or London. And so you even see that in a European context. It is amazing where those imaginary sort of, where they go to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's cultural affinity, It's also where you look at, you've been brought up to look west in this case, right? So, I mean, it's the same thing I see happening a lot in Asia. Asia's always looked to the former colonies, Asians, Africans, the trade, the transport hubs, the connections, everything was through London or Paris, the French CFA, the French army coming in when it's needed. Everyone looked to the former colonies, which was for a very long time. It's changing now, and there's more interconnections because, I still remember there were times when if you were flying to, say, Africa, you had to go through Brussels, A lot of people
I was going to say that. If you want to get to anywhere in Africa, you need to fly through another European city.
Yeah, but Turkish Airlines is changing that. Turkish Airlines is changing that.
And this is part of that multipolarity.
Yeah.
Turkey is gaining more power.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that, the global South economically, politically, socially is getting more powerful. You do need to listen to people there more often. And at the same time, as you just said, they're also being ignored more. I find that to be how do you explain that paradox?
They're not being ignored. I don't think that's the word. What's the word for it? They're being overlooked.
Okay.
They're being deliberately overlooked because they can be heard, they can be seen. I mean, you see them in the UN, and you can see countries. But there's an assumption here, and this is what was, I think, a really terrible lesson for European Union to learn, and Americans possibly also, is during COVID. Countries were really saying, well, where are you with your solidarity and your vaccines? And everybody was holding their vaccines. Same thing when Russia invaded Ukraine. There was a lot of talk about, rules-based order. This is a flagrant violation of, national sovereignty, all of which was true. But these countries, not all of them, many of them were not falling into line with the sanctions against Russia, and of course many still haven't. And that was a real rude wake-up call for the Europeans, because they assumed that, former colonies would join in, no questions asked, but questions were asked.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the multipolar world is complicated, but I tell you, it's an exciting place to be.
Brussels.
Well, no, multipolar world.
The world, yes.
Yeah, no, but Brussels too.
It's the only world I know. It is a very interesting world, I agree.
But I don't know if Brussels can be described as exciting, but it is. It is fascinating. There's a lot happening behind the scenes,
And you've been here for how many? Forever.
I'm not going to say. No, I've been here for
a long time.
I came here as a teenager, so
Yeah.
I went to university here. I've been here for a long time. I've been working for a very long time. When I started off working on the European Union, there were very few women reporters, and there were very few brown people or those of Muslim descent anywhere near the EU institutions, apart from the restaurants and maybe security and cleaners. So it was a very different European Union, but a great place actually. I learned a lot, and I really, I have to say, I'm committed to the European Union project. I know it sounds really, I'm so critical of it, right? Everything I write.
Well, the things we love the most, we are also the hardest on, right?
Yeah, but it was a fun time. I learned a lot. I met amazing people, and had the privilege of being there at very, very important occasions for the EU, the enlargement, the launch of the euro, going to press conferences, asking the questions, and getting quite a lot of traction in the press. I mean, the review was following the EU with me, so it was a fun time to be. Yeah, no regrets.
How have you seen things like what was Brussels then versus now? What are some of the major?
Which Brussels?
Yeah.
Which
Well, we're just talking politically, so
Okay,
just
you mean
like
the
EU
Brussels are white.
Yeah.
What I call Brussels are white.
Because as you just said, you just said then there were so few people of color or people from other parts of the world.
Within
the EU bubble, within the sort of the echelons of power politically,
corridors.
But now you're still saying Brussels so white. So I'm interested in what's changed, what hasn't changed.
First of all, let me just move outside Brussels so white for a second.
Okay.
Right?
We'll
because I went to university
Right.
here, and I have friends here, and I'm part of the real Brussels too, right?
Yes, many people don't know there is actually a city of Brussels.
City
It's
of
actually
Brussels.
very cool. It's
And
very diverse.
It's very diverse.
And it's a lot packed into a very small place.
Yeah.
If you can get out of the bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Mishpacha, yes, we're talking to you. Are you enjoying this episode? Well, don't let us sit here alone in the corner in the dark, sitting where we belong. Join us there. Show us some love by subscribing, maybe even throwing us some gelt for it. Thebupkes.com. That's where you should find us and where you should do those things. And be sure to tell your friends about us, and also your enemies, or really anyone else. We take everybody. We're very inclusive that way.
That's one of the strengths of Europe at the moment, for sure, at the moment still, is that there is a very strong civil society still. I mean, the space is shrinking, censorship is there, funding is short, and all the rest of it. But our voices, because you and I are also civil society, are still there and still very strong. And I think that is the strength of Europe. I think compared to, China, many countries in Asia, many countries in Africa. The strength of civil society is much more visible and much more impactful.
I would say that's probably the only difference, the only big material difference. I know that in Europe now, as you pointed out, double standards, politicization of so many things, police brutality, resurgence of racism. It's never gone away, but it's being normalized in a way that we haven't seen in a while. But there is still a sense of recourse. There is still a sense that there are, either within the civil service of countries or nonprofits, watchdogs, oversight, that you have some chance of fairness. Once that goes away and it's being squeezed, then we really, then at least I'd rather have hot pot in China and enjoy the excellent food. If I'm going to have the same level of sort of repression without the recourse.
The recourse is very important. The lawyers are, I think, really, Europe's lawyers, I always say, are the heroes, really. I mean, some of them, really, when they act against the Rwanda policy. I mean, they are, in a sense, become our human rights defenders. I mean, they're the ones with the tools to stop our governments from, going overboard. And I mean, there's, as you say, William, this violation of our human rights conventions in our migration policy. I mean, Fortress Europe. I started talking about Fortress Europe in the 1980s, but it was meant to be about trade, because there was a very strong protectionist tendency in Europe on trade. And then, at the Far Eastern Economic Review, we started talking about Fortress Europe. But now the Fortress Europe we're talking about is about keeping people out, not just...
It's ideological.
Yeah, it's ideological and civilizational more and more, but it's also very much a fortress.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got that Mediterranean as the moat, if you like, or the forest in Central.
And anyone, all you have to do to know how ridiculous that is go to Tunisia, look at a map, and see where Malta is and where Italy is in relation to you, and you ask yourself, why is there a difference here? What is this is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's become much more, as you say, it's become much more civilizational. I mean, I think that word is going to become very much part of our vocabulary because of the new security strategy from the US, which talks about civilization. For a long time, we didn't talk about it, right? It was considered to be kind of a taboo because it brought back all the terrible kind of, white supremacist. But now I think all of this is out in the open. And I think that this is now going to be the real test for Europe and all its values and principles, the unity and diversity and all the rest of the things that we've been hearing. We're going to build a union of equality and all the rest of it. I think at the moment we're failing that test. And that, I think, is a real challenge for the EU because, listen, what makes the EU different on this very kind of messy global stage, right? So we're not China. Right? We don't have that kind of, if we're talking to someone, China has a story to tell, which is amazing, right? But that story is not our story. Our story is amazing, but if we're actually going back on so many of those amazing things we did, if we're violating all of that, what do we have to sell on the global marketplace? We don't have the military muscle of the Americans, Actually, I mean, I'm not going to talk about Australia, Canada, because let's be very fair, in this multipolar world, there are 3 poles at the moment.
Right.
I mean, let's be very frank about it. So what do we have to offer? And if you ask my friends in the global south, it was our values and principles, our human rights commitments, the fact that we were there for human rights defenders, etc., behind the scenes helping them and all that. But with our double standards now, migration policy, Gaza, and others as well, we've lost that asset we had. We don't have military muscle. We don't have the story of, from poverty to riches that China has. We had this thing, we were good people with good intentions, doing good things in the world. Well, ain't the case anymore.
You said, failing the test. That's an interesting phrasing because, tell me if you agree or disagree or have a different idea of it. I'm not so sure if these double standards weren't always there. It's just that Europe was never put to the test before. And now there really is these questions like, where do you stand on Gaza? Where do you stand on Ukraine? Like there are very salient, acute situations that you really have to make a political call in a way that Europe has not had to do before. And so we've talked about before, the masks falling. That so do you think, like, I mean, with given Europe's longer history of imperialism, these things were kind of always there, and now we're just seeing that, oh, they were always there. Or do you think there was more of a genuine shift?
What you're saying is something that I'm really grappling with in my professional life, because as you said, I've been here for some time, and I've been a very strong believer in the EU, and I've sort of in my writing, I've always tried to explain the EU to people. I've always tried to bring people together, etc. And I think there was a different kind of dynamic, and I can't put my finger on it really. All of that was there, as you're saying, but there was also good intentions, and there were good things that were being done. Somehow, now you're right, the mask has fallen, but I think our politicians are also different, and I think the leadership that we had, say even 10 years ago, it was not visionary, but it was forward-looking. It was intellectually quite impressive, and also quite introspective about who we are. And there were real discussions. I mean, in our think tanks, we were really kind of you were
thinking in your think tanks. You're really thinking.
Now we're all tanking, right? So
that's great. I like this. We used to be thinking, and now we're tanking.
Tanking.
Yeah.
But what I mean is that there was a certain degree of honesty, also. A recognition that we had committed. Nobody talked about colonialism and slavery, transatlantic slavery, and all that. But there was a kind of almost a humility about it, and then I think we went through a process where we thought we'd sort of, become really the bee's knees, as we say, we've got something really far, and it was a good moment, but I think it led to a certain hubris, and now we're really, I don't know, I see our leaders, and I have to say the racism that is now is so openly dog whistled at the European level. The first time you hear someone say something, and I can't really remember when it all started, but yeah, I know when it all started, 9/11, when you're a Muslim or a brown person or a black person, it all started with 9/11.
Yeah.
And since then, there is such a creepy kind of degeneration. We don't need Trump to come and do it. We have this is what I'm writing at the moment, by the way. We have our own, very, very potent form of racism and Islamophobia. All he's doing is, fanning the fires. I mean, is there
and legitimizing it, because he is the president of the United States. Yeah.
Legitimizing it, putting money behind it, putting his authority, as you're saying, behind it. So there's going to be worse now. And I think there should be a wake-up call for our leaders, but they haven't responded in any kind of impressive way.
If anything, they're also amplifying and being pushed, or maybe letting themselves, again, in terms of masks falling. It's we've seen time and again in France, in Germany, in Italy, and many other countries, when push comes to shove, siding with those racist voices on the right.
Absolutely, amplifying them, bringing them into government, building coalitions with them. I mean, you see that at the European Parliament, there's supposed to be this cordon sanitaire, which keeps parties from mingling with the far right. I mean, who talks about that now? So yeah, there's been a creeping form of. Some people say a creeping form of authoritarianism, but I mean, it's really, and that I think is going to be the biggest challenge the EU has. Is it going to turn, is it going to make its black and brown Muslim citizens really second-class citizens, as Trump wants that to be, or is it going to stick by its treaty obligations and its promises to be a union of equality? And I think, but I think, William, I'm glad we're having these discussions. I was born in Pakistan. I stopped writing for a Pakistani paper because I was being censored. I am privileged, and I realize that I can say these things about, the European leaders so far without getting into any real trouble.
No knocks on the door yet.
No knocks on the door yet. Yeah. But, there are other forms of discrimination, but there is a certain degree of yeah, journalistic space
Mm.
that exists here. I don't know if I mean I'm
There's
saying
there's a
this.
lot of self-censorship that I think
Oh
happens.
yeah, self-censor. I mean, don't we all do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, self-censorship. Also, at the moment we're going through this period where you are judged on what you have said about
Hmm.
Gaza, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what position you've taken on this terrible genocide. And in the European Union, as in many parts of the West, I think people like myself who have taken a very strong stance against war crimes and for human rights and for justice for Palestinians, we do face a backlash.
Yeah.
It can be under the radar. It can be innuendo. It can be dinner time tables where people burst into tears because somebody says something which they then wrongly interpret as anti-Semitic. God forbid. We should not do that, and no one does. But criticism of Israel is so quickly conflated
Mm.
with anti-Semitism. It's terrible. It's terrible for my Jewish friends as well. So we're living through some very dangerous moments, and I always say we shouldn't forget the past. I mean, Germany shouldn't forget its past when it attacks people on the street, when its police forces attack people on the street. So yeah, when you say, nobody's going to leave Europe, I think some people are beginning to think that this is not the
The
good
bee's
spot,
knees.
the good spot, the safe space, the bee's
Yeah.
knees, the safe space that they thought it was.
Yeah.
Mm.
So this you're very big on this Brussels so white idea. You've written about it. Certainly, I remember. I think you had a Guardian article shortly after the current European Commission was put together. And I'm really interested in the idea of whiteness and what it means to be white. I mean, especially in a European context where or in the EU, you have 27 countries with unique backgrounds, unique cultural experiences, unique histories. Many of these people in the EU have only been considered white about 14 seconds ago.
That's
Like
true.
the Greeks,
Yeah.
the Italians, the
Yeah.
Poles, like these were not white people at a certain time of history. Whiteness evolves, it adapts, it
power.
changes, it's power. So I find it fascinating and hugely important to understand what you mean when you talk about Brussels so white, when it does represent 27 very unique, different, nations, nation states, histories, identities, and then sub-identities within that.
For me, this Brussels and white was not something I invented, by the
Right.
way. It's Ryan Heath from
Mhm.
Politico. He's the
Mhm.
first person in Brussels, Australian journalist who was in Politico then. It was the first piece he wrote, and he
Mhm.
interviewed me about it as well, and we talked about it, and so he started this whole thing because he was struck. I
Mhm.
think being Australian British, he was quite struck by what he saw here.
Yeah, how homogenous it is.
Yeah, homogeneity in terms of whiteness,
Mhm.
but also in terms of, as you said, groupthink and all the rest of it. And then, but literally, there were such. I mean, the number of people in the institutions who are of a different ethnic background
Mhm.
in terms of their origins,
Mm.
I mean, seriously, it is so small
Mm.
that it does strike you. So that I think Trump shouldn't worry so much, and I'm going to write that. I mean, Trump
Yeah.
shouldn't worry. He'll
That
be
is
very
that's one of the
welcome.
many funny things about this. It's like, has he even, I mean, there's not much to,
No,
Europe's okay in that
he's
regard.
misinformed.
Yeah.
He's very misinformed.
Well, that's very on brand to
Yeah,
be misinformed,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think. So.
yeah. So I think he's got the wrong end of the stick.
Let's take a break from the conversation to bring you our Bupkes Broken Clock of the Week. This week's Bupkes Broken Clock of the Week is Belgian PM Bart de Wever. Now, if you haven't heard of Belgian PM Bart de Wever, it's probably because he's, well, the Belgian PM. He's also a Flemish nationalist who still supports reunifying with the Netherlands, which, if that were to actually happen, would make him Prime Minister of Greater Amsterdam, maybe. When Bart de Wever is not lamenting the consequences of the 16th century, he's formalizing plans to adopt the American model of the social contract. High taxes, few services. As the current American president might say,
The deal is horrible.
but de Wever isn't wrong all the time. He's put up recently a nasty fight to impose most of the rest of the EU that favors seizing Russia's frozen assets on Ukraine's behalf. He's no doubt got his own motivations that have nothing to do with jurisprudence and credibility, but it's kind of meshuggah for Europe to think it's a good idea to break the piggy bank just because they feel like it and don't like those other guys. Crazy thing, de Wever mostly won, which probably means Germany will have its revenge by making its trains run even more delayed to Brussels than they already do. Speaking of pissing off the Germans, de Wever gets extra Bupkes broken clock points for this mic drop on German-owned Politico.
Politico, you published some very nice articles with some very nice titles, claiming that I was Russia's most valuable asset. I like that one a lot. I will remember that one. But go ahead with your question anyway. Because as I said, a real politician lets go of his emotions, even if these emotions are pure anger, vengeance, and maybe even violence. But go ahead, what is your title gonna be? If it depends on what I say, then I'm gonna say nothing at all. We found a solution for the financing of Ukraine and we were unanimous. 3 countries don't want to be implicated, okay? That's good, but now I have to go to my dacha in St. Petersburg where my neighbor is Depardieu, and then across the street there is Assad. And I think I can become mayor of that little village. Maybe that could be your title.
Looks like everyone in Belgium is getting a vest in their Christmas stocking this year.
Okay, so there's a lot of talk. I hear it all the time. Migrants don't integrate.
Right.
Integration has to be a big priority for countries. So, integration. Do any of the EU people integrate?
Right.
Does von der Leyen integrate? She's living on the 13th floor of the Berlaymont in a room without windows, apparently, allegedly. Goes home to wherever, Hamburg or
Hanover, I believe.
Hanover, sorry, yeah. On weekends, doesn't go to cocktail parties, etc. Whatever, she doesn't mix with the hoi polloi, right? So
That's the ideal technocrat.
that's the technocrat, right? And I am being told integrate. Your people don't integrate. Muslims don't integrate. You live in communities. You don't move beyond your communities. William, as a journalist, I can tell you there is a German community, there's the Dutch community, there's a French community. I was lucky I could navigate because I could speak French and English, Spanish, so I was, it's open, it's not. But, so there's a kind of a double standard there again, somehow only brown, black people.
Yeah, well, there's
and Muslims have this onus on them that they absolutely have to integrate, and I've never really understood what it is. I mean, is it eating pork? Is it drinking beer? I mean, what is it? Is it taking off your hijab? I mean, be clear,
Yeah.
Tell us.
I don't think the people saying that even know what that means.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a position of privilege and power of the groups that don't have to integrate, whatever that means, and those that do. I've seen this in Berlin so much where like the least integrated groups are the Anglos, Americans and the British. And no one ever says, you only speak English, and you never leave your English language bookshop or whatever your Anglo.
Exactly.
And that is
the power thing.
and that's a power thing because of course in Berlin or the Germans they're looking up to the great Anglo-American cultural domination, whereas then they then get to look down to any global South, Muslim, Arab. So the integration goes up.
Unless he's rich or
Right,
she's rich.
right. Unless they're bringing some kind of capital with them.
Yes.
And then then certain doors will probably open.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I had this conversation with a Black American friend of mine, African American friend of mine, and he was walking in the street and he saw Belgian police, being very nasty to Belgian African, maybe a migrant, I don't know, but anyway, asking for papers and being rather sort of, physically abusive. And he was walking past, he stopped and he said, "What's happening?" And they sort of turned to him and, just thought, oh my God, another African coming to disturb my, our interrogation.
Yes.
And he spoke in English with his British accent, and they were like, oh, he's British. Oh, sorry, did I say he was American? He's American and British. So I guess he can do both accents. And
he's truly integrated.
He's truly integrated.
He's super
and
integrated.
their attitude completely changed.
Yeah. And that's about the power.
Yeah.
And so and that's another form of non-physical whiteness.
I mean, it's the Rishi Sunaks of the world, right? Go to posh schools and all that, and very rich. No, but it's interesting also because now our very clever governments are using that, right? The black and brown politicians to actually impose the toughest policies on their citizens. I mean, you've got Shabana Mahmood now in the UK, and Dilan Yejurgush is doing it in the thing. And the argument is that if you are black or brown, you're not really racist, and you have a very good story to tell. So your harsh and cruel and abusive policies cannot ever be called racist because you're black and brown and you're putting them.
You tokenized someone and stuck them in front of a camera.
Yeah, it's happening now, huh?
Yeah.
Everywhere now. That's the new thing. And the British, I think, are way ahead of the game, but the French have done it as well. And I'm not sure about Germany, but the Netherlands has done it as well. And you could say, hey, this is representation. This is good. This is diversity. This is progress. In a way, it is. Not every black, brown, Muslim person has to be progressive, and
many aren't.
And many aren't. But I think it's also a betrayal of your. I really think it's a betrayal of your moral obligation to yourself, really. And I think that for me that's the ultimate betrayal. But that's what matters in today's West. That's the way you move forward.
Yeah. Again, it's accessing those levers of power.
Yeah.
And it's also a very liberal way of understanding these mechanisms because you can celebrate the individual getting ahead without seeing the structural and the group dynamics of all the people who aren't.
What is it like? I think overall, if you're very generous and I think the numbers there's no real census numbers, but people say it's between 25 to 45 million Europeans, including refugees and everything, who are not white. Okay, so they're not counting Ukrainians, etc. Here. So that is, I think, not even 10% of the EU population. I don't know where the civilizational erasure or decay will come from. From these people.
And again, many of them might vote conservative or.
Yeah. But also many of them contribute to our Europe. I mean, in so many ways. I mean, we saw that during COVID, didn't we, with the essential workers, doctors, nurses, transport workers. I mean, the doctors. I mean, I think Germany recognizes, nothing else recognizes that the health system would.
Well, they made a very big deal out of the fact that it was someone of Turkish descent who came up with the vaccine.
Yeah.
Again, applauding the individual without really seeing the structural aspects.
And what he had to fight through to get to a proper school and not be just shunted off to some kind of technical college or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So, given all of this legitimate criticism, what makes you still pro-European? What does that even mean for you?
I have to say that it is a very somber moment for us, all of us, in terms of, we've got so much war and havoc and, just around us. I mean, what's happening in Ukraine is just terrible. It's just terrible. I mean, and now we've got, I don't even want to talk about Gaza because but we've got wars happening again. And there's a securitization and militarization going on where now it's almost like talking of peace is almost like a betrayal. It's almost like you're not keeping up with the, with the narrative, the dominant narrative, which is all about war and competition. Don't you find that?
I find that completely, that you are almost, you risk being accused of being, a Russian sympathizer or a propagandist or naive.
Naive is a word I hear a lot.
Yeah.
If you want to destroy everything that Europe has built, you do what Russia's done. you get Europe to start building up its military, and of course we should have a strong military, but to have their budgets going more into the military. I mean, this is the way, isn't it the way that America in the end helped to destroy the Soviet Union? By the competition was so fierce, and there was this war in Afghanistan, and there was so there was the space race and all the rest of it. So you force your competitor to be doing all kinds of things that take away the energy, from the core mission, which is development and progress, and making sure your people are happy, and making sure that the world is happier, making sure that the climate is stabilized or improved, making sure that there are no more wars, that your kids go to school, that inequality is diminished, that we can do that. And nobody talks about inequality anymore. We're only talking about war. I was at a think tank meeting the other day. I was the only person who brought up the issue of inequality because everybody is just talking about the war and where the money is going to come from. Do we unfreeze or freeze the Russian assets? And I'm saying it's very, very important. But I've seen what happens to countries that are only thinking about war. The education system, the health system. I mean, we're not Pakistan in Europe, right? So we have the money to do all of that. But the cost of living is a real problem. Inequality is a real problem. Housing is a real issue here. There are people still sleeping in our streets. So we can't be complacent about that either, And that's what actually keeps me here. I think I've been thinking about what you said. I think it's the hope that I can, in a very, very modest way, help maybe in a way to keep reminding people, having those uncomfortable conversations, writing those articles, saying those things that remind people that, we can do things differently. We don't have to be racist. We don't have to be Islamophobic. We don't have to have this kind of prejudice and bias and one-dimensional view of the world. There is diversity is a good thing, and I feel that people often ask me, why do you even care? You're having a good life, and I'm privileged, and I'm very thankful to the universe for that. But with privilege comes responsibility, and my responsibility is to make. I mean, I know it sounds very, like I'm some kind of guru, but I seriously feel that if my voice can help, tiny little bit, if it makes people angry, that's fine. I just want to remind people that these roots are doomed to take us into very, very horrible situations.
I think the politics needs to become more political, and everything else needs to become a lot more human.
Right. No, that's right.
Get out of the moral register and actually start thinking about the society we want to live in together.
The society we want to live in together. Exactly. I had a moment during the COVID-19 when I thought to myself, you know what? This is a reset. I really seriously thought this is a reset. And this is going to purify us. Horrible, horrible thing. This is going to change us. This is going to make us kinder, nicer people. Climate change is going to stop. We're going to be, we're going to be good to each other again. We're going to help each other again. I really thought that. I mean, how stupid was I, right? We come out of it.
It's a nice thought.
It's a nice thought.
It's a nice aspiration.
It's a naive thought.
I don't know if that's a hopeful note to end on, but it's certainly, I think, an excellent understanding of how these sort of events, the way they change us and don't change us, but then also change us in ways that we're not thinking about. Because I do think we haven't reckoned with the pandemic. Things haven't changed in certain ways that maybe you were outlining, but in some ways, exactly because of not reckoning with it, we've changed quite a bit. And I think moments like that deserve a lot of attention that maybe we're not giving it, that go through these questions of equality, diversity, political inclusion, who's sitting at the table, who's making these decisions, who's benefiting and who's hurting, and who's getting to party despite the rules and not. So I think that at least is a thought to end on. But we don't go anywhere without giving our guests as a gesture of our appreciation. Our guests, and when we can, get a lovely Bupkes notebook where you can fill full of Bupkes, emptiness, nothing, as Bupkes is the Yiddish for nothing. So this is a token of our appreciation for joining us. And of course, you can get one of these if you subscribe to
Oh,
thebupkes.com.
really?
So this is, or if you also, you should definitely subscribe to Simply Shada on Substack. And also, you'll just find her in all the other places we talked about. And because it is somewhere between the 3rd and the 17th night of Hanukkah, we have a pair of socks for you as well.
Wow.
Because
I love
nothing
these
says
socks.
Hanukkah like socks.
Oh, this is so cool.
So which is funny because of course whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or any kind of gift giving occasion, it tends to be a very one focus on children, and there's nothing a child wants less than socks.
That's right.
But the mark of adulthood is they go from being the least desired thing to the most desired
So
thing.
true, right?
So
So true.
when my grandmother would give me socks on Hanukkah, I thought she was the worst, and now all I want is socks. Get yourself some socks, get someone you care about for socks, whether it's for Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever, and wishing you, Shada, and everyone else a merry, happy, whatever it is that one does or doesn't do.
Yeah.
So thank you. This has been Talk About Bupkes from The Bupkes, that's thebupkes.com, and all the other places where you can find it. Simply Shada. Thanks very much.
Thank you.